Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's Auxis Corporate Performance Series webinar, Leveraging the Cloud to Reduce Disaster Recovery Risk and Expense. My name's Yaslin Arroyo, and I'm the moderator for today's webinar. At this point, I'd like to introduce our featured speaker with Auxis, George Fernandez. George Fernandez is the Operations Manager for the IT Managed Services practice at Auxis. In his role, George manages the daily IT operations for many Auxis clients throughout the United States while maintaining our service delivery model at its highest level. A graduate of Florida International University with an extensive background in infrastructure management, process and procedure implementation, and team building, George attributes his success to his tenure as a minor league professional baseball player for various organizations. Today he'll present Leveraging the Cloud to Reduce Disaster Recovery Risk and Expense. Before we begin, let me remind all participants we welcome your questions. Please submit them in your webinar panel at any time. We will address your questions at the conclusion of the webinar. And with that, I'll turn it over to our speaker, George Fernandez. George?
Thank you, Yaslin. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for your time today. As Yaslin mentioned, I'll be discussing how it is that we could leverage the cloud to reduce our disaster recovery risk and expense. As Yaslin mentioned, we truly welcome your questions. That's what we look to get out of these webinars. Usually we can't cover everything and answer all your questions, and any specifics we'd like to make sure that we cover them. So please submit your questions during the webinar, and we'll go ahead and answer those at the end. Well, so getting started here, the first thing that we'll go into is our agenda. So we're going to go ahead and determine, kind of discuss a little bit our RPO and our RTO and determine how it is that we come up with these metrics. For the most part, what I'm going to try to bring to light is the leveraging the cloud. Recovery point and recovery time sometimes it can be a bit tough to come up with. It can be a bit tricky. We usually don't get exacts, and I'd really like to go into that and kind of show you how gaining RPO and RTO isn't going to be as daunting of a task as it seems. Then I'm going to go ahead and we're going to go through analyzing what our disaster recovery and cloud providers SLAs are, and what is the best way to present these and put it in our hands. Usually SLAs are posed to us as customers and as consumers, and in this case, for the disaster recovery cases, we have the power of posing these to our providers. And lastly, we'll go through my David Letterman top 5 reasons to leverage the cloud for disaster-based recovery. So let's get started. Usually I like to start with some numbers that they're interesting numbers to say the least, but they're also a bit shocking. As you can see there, 43% of companies that experience a major data loss do not reopen, folks. It seems drastic, but the numbers don't lie. Companies do go bankrupt due to a disaster. As you can see, they're moving to the next. 80% of the companies that don't rebound from a critical data loss within a month, if it takes them longer than a month, they seem to be in trouble. And that's 80%. That's a large number of companies. Obviously, this is companies that experience a disaster. But if you're not back up within a month's time, if you haven't recovered your data within a month's time, the numbers say that the future isn't looking bright for your organization, unfortunately. Then, moving on, 51% of companies are out of business after experiencing an unrecoverable loss of major data. So anything, losing data in an accounting system, in some cases, losing data in email systems. We've seen stories, and there have been publishings of email systems crashing, data not being able to be recovered, and guess what? We're out of business. And then 100% of the companies out there have experienced some kind of application or data loss. and that happens daily. I mean, it can be, but in some cases, even a user's data loss can be classified as disaster. I'm sure any engineers that are with us, they've heard it. President secretary lost data. That's almost disastrous. So moving on. So the terms disaster recovery and business continuity. You'll see me refer to those as DR and BC, or you've seen them as DR and BC. For the most part, disaster recovery and business continuity, they mean the same thing. Tomato, but unfortunately, disaster recovery and business continuity comes up after a disaster strikes or after we've lost productivity in our production environments. That's unfortunate, but it's the naked truth. That's usually when we start talking about disaster recovery and business continuity. And usually what we hear from our superiors is, okay, so what do we do to prevent this? And that immediately is followed by, yeah, and how much is that going to cost? So what I'm trying to do here is, what I'm trying to get through to everyone is, I'd like for everyone to understand that disaster recovery and business continuity is within our reach. It is no longer that high price tag that we see and immediately gets eliminated from our budgets because simply, well, yeah, you know what, disaster won't happen to us, or we really don't need it. I mean, it's a lot of money for something that's going to sit there and do nothing. I want you to focus on that. Sit there and do nothing, because it's not just going to sit there. That's why we're going to show you how you can leverage and how you can show return on the investment of investing in a cloud environment for your disaster recovery. So moving on, so we're going to talk a little bit about recovery point and recovery time objectives, RPO and RTO. You'll see me during my presentation refer to these as RPO and RTO. Talking about RPO and RTO, it seems, as I mentioned earlier, as a daunting task to come up with these numbers. The reason I say that is because we usually hear numbers that sometimes seem like if they're unlikely to be reached or impossible in some cases. There's some factors that come into play when determining your RPO and RTO. And the way that we do this, us as IT professionals, is first we got to sit and listen. We got to understand what it is that the business needs. So what I'm going to go through in this session is, what are we looking for? What is it that we need to gather this information? First thing we're going to identify is our stakeholders, our departments. We're going to identify, obviously, all of our departments: accounting, human resources, sales, operations. And what we're trying to do when we identify these departments is understand what their systems are and how critical are they to their production. How critical are they to their everyday work? And lastly, how critical are they to the business? Where do they land on the ladder of, if we're not running, we're not generating revenue. If we're not running, X department isn't running. These are the things that we have to determine. As IT professionals and as the IT department of your organization, you understand the applications, you understand their dependencies, but you always want to get this right from the, it's cliche, it might sound cliche, but you want to get it right from the horse's mouth. You want to talk to the subject matter experts. These are the SMEs. These are the subject matter experts within the departments. Sometimes a SME is simply designated by, you know what, they've been with the company for 15 years. They know everything. Sometimes it is because a department has hired a subject matter expert in their application because their application is that critical to them and to the business. So there's a lot of designations for a subject matter expert. From an IT perspective, I like to designate the subject matter expert as my best friend in that department. Subject matter experts, we need to consider them as our best friends because they're the ones that are going to be able to give us the critical information to come up with these famous RPO and RTO numbers. And lastly, we want to identify our decision makers. The decision makers are the ones that at the end are going to approve or disapprove of the RPOs and RTOs that have been set by these subject matter experts or that have been presented to us by these subject matter experts. Next, we're going to identify the systems. Again, as IT professionals, we understand our systems. We know the systems that we have. But what we're trying to do is understand the dependencies within the systems, because we're going to go into disaster recovery, and in disaster recovery we need to make sure that we're up like we are in production. Obviously what this webinar is going to come and tell us is it sounds very expensive, George. I mean, it's very expensive for me to mirror my production environment, and you're right. In traditional disaster recovery scenarios, it is extremely costly to replicate your production environment to bare metal. Sites, disaster recovery sites, hardware, maintenance, resources, updates, all of this number starts adding up when you're talking about physical bare metal presence of a replicated production environment for disaster recovery. And then it's sitting there, and a lot of, it's just, hey, it's just a system that's sitting there. Where are we going to spend this money? But again, we want to replicate it. We want to mirror this environment. When mirroring this environment, you got to take into consideration email. Email is I mean, everybody will tell you, well, if I have email, I can work. I'll be fine. And we kind of know it's really not true, because once they have email, then it's, hey, yeah, you know what? I work a lot with my CRM. I don't have any of my customers' numbers. Or, you know what, George? The enterprise resource planning application, I really need that. I noticed that I can't do much without it. So everybody always starts with email, and then it's like, yeah, you know what? I think I need everything else to work with. You want to concentrate on your security, and you want to understand that this security has to come over. I mean, it's a huge thing. You want to, when you have a disaster recovery environment, you want to make sure you don't add insult to injury. You don't want to add salt to that wound. So you don't want another disaster happening when you're in disaster recovery mode. So you want your security to be there. A lot of times you hear, well, it's going to take us, it's just for a couple of days. In a couple of days, you can become extremely vulnerable to cyber attacks. You can become extremely vulnerable to data loss. You can become extremely vulnerable to breaches in your network enterprise. So it is very important that you take into consideration your security and authentication systems. Obviously, we're identifying our CRM systems. They're very popular within organizations now. Our ERP systems. Financial and accounting, that's a no-brainer. I don't know, but there isn't probably a CFO around that isn't going to tell you something as simple as, I need QuickBooks running, or I need Great Plains running. So these are things. Reporting. Initially, reporting seems like something that's, in the past, reporting was just a nice to have. Now, we need reporting. Reporting is needed daily, from inventory reporting to numbers reporting. I mean, a disaster strikes at the end of the year. Sales is going to tell you, it's end of year, it's end of month. I need my reports. I need to know where I'm at. So, so it's very important. And obviously, telecommunications. I'm sure everybody has a cellular phone, but it's kind of tough to even though some are running business via their cellular phone, but for the most part, at the enterprise level, it's going to be kind of tough to accomplish that. So again, identify your systems. Lastly, identify your resources. That seems like a simple one, because our hardware is our baby in the infrastructure side of IT, and we understand all the hardware. I mean, you ask any system engineer, any operations manager. I manage 50 nodes. I manage 100 servers. I manage 100 hosts and 500 VMs. We have that number, but identify it. Identify what it is that you're going to need. Again, you want to mirror your production environment. You want to mirror your production environment. Again, I know it sounds like a costly term towards mirroring a production environment. You hear what you're saying? Hence why we're presenting this webinar to you, for you to understand that it can be done if you leverage the cloud. So you can identify your servers, your storage. You got to identify your PCs. The simple reason is in a call, center scenario. You need to understand the PCs that you need, because you're going to be bringing up call center personnel off-site. So you need to know the PCs that you're going to need. You're going to need to know what the operating system that they're going to have, so that it can support all of your applications. Again, you're going to mirror your production environment. Peripherals. People might think, oh well, George, it's a disaster. You're going to have to do without printing. No, no, no. As paperless as we think we are in this century, we're not. We're going to need to print. There's a lot of users that like to print. There's a lot of users that need optical drives. So we need to take all of this into consideration. And lastly, we need to understand our users. Who are the users that in a disaster recovery scenario are going to sustain and be in operation during a disaster turn-up, a disaster recovery environment turn-up? What are these users going to be doing? How much time are they going to be on the systems? We might be running more time, we might be running less time than our usual business hours. Usually you're running more time. But understand your users and the type of users that are going. Everyone knows that there's certain departments that tend to be a bit more, I guess, IT savvy, for lack of a better term. So we need to understand who's going, so that we're ready to prepare them on how to act or how to work in a disaster recovery environment. I mean, basically what we're doing is we are going to mirror this environment, but they need to be ready and understand that. So basically, when you've gathered all this information, now you come up with the task of determining what your RPO and RTO is going to be. Again, getting to something that's going to be a happy medium that everybody's going to agree on, we're probably not going to get there. So now we've gathered and we understand what the systems that we need to have. We understand the systems, we understand the resources, we understand the stakeholders, and at the end of the day, we're going to get the answer that we probably expected. It's going to be simple. Sorry, buddy, I can't work without any. I mean, if I lose 1 kilobyte of data, I'd say I'm unproductive. So sorry, the answer is going to be 0 across the board. Same thing with recovery time. George, I can't be down. We cannot be down for 1 second. Unless it's during lunch, I can't be down. So what we're expecting, that's exactly what you're going to get, especially in today's day and age. Let's rewind 10, 15 years ago when you had a disaster recovery, your basic brick and mortar off-site somewhere in the Midwest, where you're free of the possibility of hurricanes. There's no faults in the earth, so we won't run into any tremors or earthquakes. And yeah, the analysts say that terrorists don't even worry about Idaho. There's nothing over there to bomb, and so whatever it may be. But that's where usually those bunkers were. And yeah, at that point you had to kind of work around this RPO and RTO and try to reach a happy medium. Well, fast forward again, welcome cloud. There isn't too much that you have to work with. That's why this RPO and RTO, yes, as we do have to understand and we do have to bring it up, but it's a lot more flexible. It's a lot easier to get to what used to be an unrealistic RPO and RTO. It's a lot easier to tell them, yeah, I'm going to be able to get you, maybe a few hours less of data. So I'll get you till 12 o'clock in the afternoon, right before the disaster struck or whatever it may be. But it's a lot easier to hit those crazy numbers that we were getting back from the business as to what they needed. And moving along during this presentation, I'm going to show you how it is that we're going to be able to make this RPO and RTO gathering as easy as I'm making it sound. So we're gonna kind of look now at the resources that we are going to invest in our disaster recovery environment. We're going to see how we are going to maximize the use of the resources that are provisioned to us, and at the same time, we're going to talk a little bit about setting the SLA. and when I say set in the SLA, is we're able, in any traditional environment, in any traditional scenario, as a consumer, SLAs are posed to us. Service level agreements are posed to us. When you're talking cloud and when you're talking disaster recovery and cloud has the flexibility for you to be able to pose and for you to be able to set, these service level agreements. So you're going to tell your provider, here's what I expect. Not only here's what I expect, here's what I need in return in order for me to have a successful disaster recovery or successful cloud environment. And what these service level agreements are going to revolve around is not so much only when a disaster strikes, because we're going to be leveraging this environment for a lot more than just a disaster, and we're going to talk about that a little more. So we're getting ready to present the possibility of having a disaster recovery environment. We go to our superiors and immediately say, wow, in order for us not to lose revenue moving forward, we got to replicate our production environment. I mean, you might be saying, George, that's insane. I mean, we've been building our infrastructure for 10 years. We've spent millions of dollars, and now you expect to present to the executives, hey, we're going to replicate our environment in order, just to have a secondary environment in case something happens. No, that's not what we're going to do. What we're going to do is we're going to show them how their investment, we're going to throw up the acronym that all executives, your C-level executives, especially your CFOs and your CEOs, love to see, and your CIOs. The acronym that they love to see is ROI. They want to see what their return on investment is going to be. They want to make sure that they're getting the most bang for their buck. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to show them this is not just an environment that's going to sit there and collect dust. It's not going to be an environment that's going to sit there and collect dust. Again, rewind 10, 15 years, that's what disaster recovery sites were. They were environments that were being visited maybe once a year if you were lucky for some disaster recovery testing that was never accurate, was never efficient, and was never a true picture of what bringing up a production environment that's going to be productive for a business to continue working and to continue being productive and to continue generating revenue. So this is what we're going to pose to them, and then we're going to tell them, hey, and we're going to leverage this environment. We're not just going to make it sit there. We're going to let them know what the benefits of this are. So the first benefit is it's on demand. It's pay as you go. Obviously, it is a disaster recovery environment. It's not your production environment, so there's going to be resources. I mean, you're probably going to be using these resources all the time after we're done with this webinar, but not every resource. So we don't want to be paying for something that we're not using. Rewind again 10, 15 years. Guess what? The disaster recovery environments back then and the scenarios were simple. You paid for racks in a bunker, and the power was turned on, and you had a contract for one whole year, and you had a number of set devices that you have under contract, and that's what you're set with. You can't remove a device and you can't add a device. That's what you're paying for that year. So that's what you're stuck with. And the power is going to be running, and even though the lights are off, but that power is still going to be running, even though nobody's even looking at these, and we can't do anything but just let them sit there for that once a year trip that we're taking to test and make sure that the systems are running and that the amber and green lights are blinking. So no matter what, you're paying whether you're using it or not. And 10, 15 years ago, you weren't using it. It was collecting dust. Fast forward again, 10, 15 years, hello cloud. And here now we have an environment where you're only going to be paying for what you use when you use it. If file server A is not being used because it's a file server, the only time it needs CPU and RAM to run is when we're doing replication. And replication is taking us about an hour. So we're going to flip the switch. We're gonna create a script that's going to turn it up. It's going to do its replication. It's done. It's shutting down. We're not paying anymore. It's being efficient. It's being effective. It's ours. It's there. It's at the touch of a button ready. but we don't have to pay for it if it's not being productive for us. So that's one of the features, and that's one of the major things that we're going to be leveraging. And that's one of the things that's going to bring this cost down, and that's going to make disaster recovery and business continuity a reality for our organization. Resources and maintenance. Let's rewind again into our, we're going to go ahead and we're going to go back into the future, and we're going to go into this era of the brick and mortar that I've just been speaking about throughout the presentation. Resources and maintenance. You need resources, and there was resources that were going in and they were doing multiple things that you were paying for, and they really weren't being productive towards your business. What they were doing was receiving tapes, putting tapes into a shelf. What they were doing was making sure that the amber light and the green light is blinking. What they were doing was, shaking the mouse to make sure the screen comes up. Oh, yeah, okay, they're up. Sitting in front of a monitor. You're paying for this resource to do all of this monotonous task, and you're paying a high price tag. It's probably not a system or network engineer that was doing this, but you're paying network engineer dollar hours for a resource. So what are we doing now? Now we're leveraging our in-house resources, the ones that the eyes over what one day can be our production environment is our resources, the ones that understand and that have skin in the game. They understand how important it is for this system to be up and maintained, and we're not paying extra for this resource. So you can remove the cost of a resource to maintain your cloud environment. Once again, leveraging it. So George, what else are we doing with this? And you're telling me it's sitting there and it's not collecting dust. What else is it going to do for me? Well, what this environment is going to do is really we're going to use this system, and we're going to use this system to avoid using it. I know that sounds like an oxymoron. George, so you're telling me we're going to use a system to avoid using it? It sounds like it doesn't make sense, but let me tell you what I mean. What we're going to do is we're going to use this to avoid system crashes. We're going to use it to avoid disasters that we can control. I can't use the system to avoid a hurricane, but I can use the system to avoid a server from crashing because I implemented a update that didn't work with the application that's running on that system. We've seen it, folks. We've seen it happen all the time. We go ahead, we drop in, Tuesday comes around, Microsoft says, hey, here we are, we're the great OS manufacturer, and here's the fixes to our OS. Go ahead and install them. Boom, we install them, we install critical, non-critical, boom, we reboot the server. Next thing we knew, Mary from accounting's calling that she can't get into accounting. What do you mean you can't get? Yep, well, we dropped in a .NET update. The .NET update does not coincide with the software release that we have. Boom, we just crashed the server. We're in a disaster mode, folks. That's what we're going to try to avoid. So now, does that oxymoronic little term that I used, it makes sense now. We're going to use our systems to avoid using them. Because really, the ultimate goal of this environment, as much as we're going to leverage these resources, the ultimate goal of this environment is for a disaster, so that we can be ready and we can be in a mirrored production environment in case of a disaster. And here, what are we doing? We're trying to avoid that. So yes, we're using a system in order to avoid having to use it. Application upgrades. What we're going to be doing here is, guys, again, we're replicating our production environment, right? Most of the times we can't just, our application vendor calls us and says, hey, remember those 5 issues that you've been having, those tickets that have been open for a year? We finally got the release, and we went ahead and we covered all 10 of those issues in this next release, but it's a full release. Okay, you know what happens. You drop in this full release. You have tables that don't match. You have character. There was a character field that used to hold 100 characters. Now they had to narrow it down to 50 characters. You have a file name that's 55 characters. You don't have access to that file. You probably even brought down the system if you don't have an equal number, if your tables don't match. So there's a lot of things, and there's a lot of vulnerabilities that come into your environment when you have to do an upgrade. A lot of times we have a dev environment. Dev environments don't really replicate our production environment. As much as we say they do, 90% of the time they don't. So what are we doing? Welcome Cloud. That production environment that I am mirroring, we're going to mirror our production environment. That means that we have almost up to real-time data. So everything's up to date, just maybe hours behind from what our production is running. So how great would it be? We go ahead and we drop our application upgrade into our mirrored production environment. And now we know what's going to break. And if something breaks, we can go ahead and remediate against it. Another thing that's interesting about this scenario is that in most cases, phase one of implementing a cloud-based disaster recovery environment, for the most part, phase one of this is virtualizing, is introducing virtualizing into your environment. When you introduce virtualizing into your environment, it means that you're virtualizing your servers and you have already some kind of virtualizing your environment. Usually when companies are getting ready to put together a disaster recovery plan and they're going to engage into disaster recovery because now they've seen that we're not 10, 15 years ago where disaster recovery is not attainable. It is attainable and it can be done and you can do more with it. So they start engaging into this, and part one or phase one of this planning is, hey, let's be virtual in-house so that we can easily relocate resources, move machines, bring up machines, bring down machines, and that's going to be beneficial also for those scenarios where you're leveraging the cloud to make your production environment stable, strong, and avoid crashes. And here's one scenario. So putting in a whole new version of a ERP system or of a CRM system can be time consuming. Sometimes you're looking at 80 hours worth of man hours. So now we've put in 40, 80 hours of getting this upgrade in place. You know, we got all on the NICs, boom, we got it. We have a working mirrored production environment in our cloud environment. We haven't disrupted our production environment yet. So now we spent 80 hours doing all this work and now it's like, oh my gosh. Minus the time of remediating, we still have probably another 50 hours that we're going to have to work on next week to put this into production. And what happens? When you start doing things in pieces, now easily you can have a mismatch of data. There's a lot of things that can happen when you can't just do everything just on a roll, because obviously you can't just implement all at once because your software and your application, your ERP application, can't be down for 40 hours straight. So that's where you start introducing issues. Well, welcome cloud. What do? We have a VM running in the cloud, and now you're virtualized and corporate. Guess what? What are we doing? We're going to go ahead and grab that environment that we've just put 80 strong man hours and a system that we know is right. We're going to go ahead, we're going to sync the data, we're going to take a snap copy of this environment and we're going to throw it back into production. Now we've narrowed down this project of upgrading our application from, I don't know, maybe 80, 120 hours to the initial 80 that we spent, testing and getting everything right. And then it maybe took us an hour or two to go ahead and replicate this back into production. Again, what are we doing? We're leveraging the cloud, and now we're maximizing our dollars and our resources. We're maximizing the time that we're spending, in our production environment, being in a maintenance mode. These applications and these systems are running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And they're doing it because they're constantly, there's information that's being fed into them from other systems. So any downtime, can put us in a bind or can put us behind. So again, we're going to leverage the cloud to avoid disruptions and disasters in our production environment through being able to test and upgrade our applications up in the cloud. Reporting systems. Well, we know what reporting systems do. Reporting systems sit and start taking up network resources, because during the course of the day, what are we doing? Everybody's in the building, and it's Friday, the 29th, the day before the end of the month, and sales is running their numbers because all of sales wants to know, hey, where do I have to be? How much more do I have to sell to meet my quota? All of these things are happening. You have accounting running your end of month. You have human resources doing a reconciliation of employee data. Everybody's running reports against our reporting system, and it can become taxing. I mean, we've seen scenarios where reporting systems have brought down networks. So what are we going to do? We're going to grab this environment, we're going to spin it up in the cloud, and we're going to run our reports off of the cloud. What are we doing? We are removing taxing unneeded network traffic and possibility of network crashing from our production environment. And yet we're using a mirrored environment of our production environment. Once again, leveraging the cloud. Once again, getting our production environment out of harm's way and making our disaster recovery environment cost effective. Now we're actually getting used to it. It's not the red Ferrari that's sitting in the garage. I know we've all loved to have a red Ferrari sit in the garage and not even turn it on. But we have that red Ferrari sitting in the garage, and we're not using it. That's not what we want. We want to have a Ferrari. We want to be able to use it daily, and that's what we're doing. That's exactly what we're doing. So we go into backups. Backups and disaster recovery sometimes, in a lot of cases, or for a lot of users or for a lot of people, is synonymous. You ask someone, hey, I've asked a lot of customers, you guys have disaster recovery in place? Yeah, we do, George. We have off-site copies. XYZ vendor comes, picks up the tape, tapes them off-site, and we have a rotation. Or, we have this real cool system where accounting takes all the tapes home on Monday, or the hard drives on Monday, and legal takes them on Tuesday, and Joey from the mailroom takes them on Thursday, and Mary from human resources takes them on Thursday. Yeah. So we have, we're covering that gap, but folks, disaster recovery does not equal to having a backup. It's not synonymous as some of us think. It's a piece of disaster recovery. It's a very critical piece of disaster recovery, but it's not disaster recovery. And what's happening is there's a lot of cost in having that off-site storage tape vendor come and pick up these tapes and take them. And folks, that's not clear of disaster recovery. That's not clear of disaster either. I mean, I've read about it in tech articles where vendor's truck flips over, unfortunately, on the interstate, and you have tapes all over the place. Tapes get stolen. Tapes are sent to the wrong customer. They got mixed up in transit. There's this thing that these vendors use. It's called the chain of custody. Folks, the reason a chain of custody letter was put in place is because tapes got lost one day. Tapes broke one day. Tapes were stolen one day. And all that chain of custody letter is, all that is accountability. Where was the tape before it got lost? Where was the tape after it was lost? Was it anywhere? Who touched it? That's why. So the driver comes, your mailroom clerk signs it, then the IT guy signs it and makes sure that those are the tapes that they took. Then the driver signs and tells you, hey, I took these tapes, and gives it to you. Then when he gets to the transfer station, he signs it off to the next driver and he says, hey, the reason is because at some point disaster struck with these tapes. These tapes got lost. So this isn't a fail-proof or a disaster-proof solution. Now, hello cloud. What are we doing? We're maximizing the cloud. We're eliminating this possibility. We're eliminating the cost. We're eliminating the cost of network drives, USB drives, if you would, NAS drives. I mean, this is becoming expensive. What are we doing now? Yeah, we still have to have NAS, or we still have to have a SAN environment, but there's no need for that second. There's no need for those tapes. Now what are we doing? We're replicating up to the cloud. We're transferring this data to the cloud. And you know what? That initial move, yes, it's a big chunk of data. But after that, all you're doing is incrementals. All you're doing is changes. So that's going to happen rather quickly. And what do we have to do? Again, we're replicating up to the cloud. And usually you think, well, storage devices up in the cloud are probably your most expensive one, especially our stale storage. Yeah, but Again, remember our first topic our first point, on-demand pay-as-you-go. That stale piece of storage is only going to be used while we're replicating. We replicate to it, we're done. And now we replicate everything up there, and the rest we can handle up in the cloud. So we're also reducing the need of large bandwidth. So there's, again, a lot of benefit. And what are we doing? We are creating a beautiful picture for our executives to understand. This environment is not stale. This environment is not just sitting there and being a budget item that's giving nothing in return. I'm going to show you ROI. I'm going to show you return on your investment. I'm going to show you how this is helping us avoid the disasters that we can avoid. Okay, there's always going to be a percentage of disasters that we can avoid, which is those natural ones, or those, caused by malicious intent. But again, what are we doing? The ones that we can minimize and the ones that we can handle, we're going through it and we're trying to minimize them. And at the end, we have what this budget item was placed there for, and it's for disaster recovery. Disaster recovery is why we put this in place, but we're making disaster recovery not as costly as it would have been, rewind 10, 15 years ago when we're in a brick and mortar situation. So at the end, what are we doing? We're replicating our production environment, folks, and we're proving that this production environment is becoming productive to the life and to the longevity of our production environment. So this is just a quick case study that disasterrecovery.org did, and all they did was grab that critical aspect of disaster recovery, which is your backup, and they ran some numbers on a company that's about 20 servers, 2 terabytes of data. Their annual growth is somewhere between 25 and 30%, and their daily change is 2 to 5%. And these are the numbers they come up with. Anything that has to do with tape is minimum 400% to 500% more in costs than leveraging the cloud. Leveraging the cloud to send backups. I mean, just in that one critical piece, in that one piece, the savings are astronomical. So right off the bat, we are seeing that disaster recovery is attainable. Disaster recovery is no longer a budget bad word. Now I'm going to go ahead and we're going to talk a little bit about the 5 top reasons as to why we should leverage disaster recovery. So this is kind of my David Letterman top 5. So ease of getting started. It's no hardware investment. Your vendors and the large infrastructures and these companies that have put billions of dollars into multiple bunker, class 5 rated disaster recovery and data centers, okay, they're the ones that are doing the investment on the hardware, and trust me, they're getting it right. All that we have to worry about is a floating operating system. We don't have to worry about BIOS upgrades. We don't have to worry about, hey, we need to add RAM to this and order the RAM. No. And then downtime to do this. We don't got to worry about hardware. We don't got to worry about hardware investment. Hiring and training of new staff. There's no need to, when you have a bare metal environment, when you have an environment that you are physically handling, maintaining, and supporting, you have to hire more staff. Usually your staffing requirements are based on your infrastructure staffing requirements are based on the number of devices that you have. And then there you say, okay, I have X amount of devices, I need X amount of system engineers to support them, X amount of network engineers, and X amount of desktop engineers and help desk staff. This is how we put together our staffing requirements. Well, we don't have this. We're not going to have these devices anymore. We're going to have floating operating systems, which basically we can consolidate into our current overhead and our current hiring and our current staffing, and it's a lot easier for us to manage these environments these mirrored production environments that are up in the cloud without having to train them. They know we're mirroring our production. Remember, folks, that means that if we're mirroring it, when you look in the mirror, you know exactly the person that you're seeing. Well, same thing here. Your staff knows exactly what's being mirrored. They know that environment up there. So there isn't need, and training, as we know nowadays, is not only time consuming, but it's also a pretty high ticket item. No secondary site investment. Obviously, the brick and mortar, we were running 10, 15 years. We're going to pay for that tab. We're going to pay for the electricity of that tab, whether there's one or whether there's 50 customers in there. It's going to be on us, and there's money that's, I mean, there's a cost for the vendor to keep this facility running, and this cost is coming out of our contract. So there is no need for a secondary site investment. There's no need to have to travel anywhere to test our disaster recovery. It's all in the cloud. We can get to it. We have access to it. We know what it is, and we don't have to worry about what it is that's running it. Here's where we get into also the SLA setting that I mentioned. You're telling them, here's what I need this to do. Here's how I need this hardware to perform. Here's what I need in order to be a productive customer of yours if I need to spin up in the cloud. Here's what I need. So now we're telling them, okay, we're posing to them, here's what our service levels are, and here's what we need to run efficiently. The next one is flexible and lower cost alternative. As I mentioned, and I've been mentioning through all of this time, we're going to leverage it to show its value, but at the end of the day, it's a lower cost alternative from 10, 15 years ago, our basic and our traditional brick and mortar disaster recovery, which I like to call it. So the scalability to accommodate shifting requirements. Folks, if we have a bare metal server and we have a new piece of software that we're putting into it, you're looking at maybe a week's time. You got to open up a maintenance window to add more RAM because the new piece of software, the new version of the software no longer supports 1 gig. We need 10 gigs. And we've seen that. We've seen that happen overnight. You know, you're 12 versions behind. Now you decided to upgrade because it became a line item. There's issues. There was modules that you needed that were going to help us. Now what do we got to do? We got to go. We got to order. Oh, let's make sure that they even make the RAM for this server because we've had this server since day one, and this application is 10 years old. Now we got to. Hello, cloud. Doing. We go in. We have a control panel. We click add more RAM, add more space. Boom. You have your environment. You have a certified, I guess, virtual piece of hardware that's going to handle the new version, and we're ready to go. It's not taking time, and it's extremely scalable. Pay only for what you need and when you need it. We talked about this, folks. If it's not needed, if it's not spinning CPU spindles, if it's not using up resources, we don't have to use it. And if we don't have to use it, we don't have to pay for it. It's that simple. We shouldn't have to pay for it. So now it's not something that they're looking at and saying, oh, that's, we're paying for that. It's collecting dust. No, it might be collecting dust, but we're not paying for it. And for the most part, we've shown that when we do need it, those updates, those servers, guess what? We have to drop an update. We're going to do it once a month. Once a month, we're going to spin them up for 4 hours. We're going to pay for the 4 hours, then we're going to turn it off. We're going to see the return on that immediately. So the pay as you go and pay only for what you need when you need it is an incredible value add. Your subscription options, your contract options, this is huge, folks. We're rewinding again. Our rewind button is going to break by the end of this webinar. So let's rewind 10, 15 years. What do we have? We have our brick and mortar. We have our contract. Let me tell you how those contracts work quickly. The contract was you have 40 servers, and 40 servers it is. If tomorrow you only need 39, you're stuck paying for 1 year or the term of your contract for 40 servers. You're going to pay for this amount of power, whether you spend this amount of power or you don't. Here's what we think 40 servers running 24/7, 365 days a year is going to spend, so this is what you're going to spend. There was no flexibility. There was no, hey, you give a little, I take a little, I take a little, you give a little. That didn't exist. Nowadays, it's simple. I need another server. Click a button, spin it up. I need to remove 4 servers. Remove those 4 servers. And what are we doing? We're only paying for what we need. So we're not stuck to a contract. Now we're again showing value. We're showing value because our business needs are like the weather. We don't know what our business needs are going to be tomorrow. Tomorrow we might need 10 more servers. Tomorrow we might need 10 less servers because we got rid of a couple of applications and we put everything into our ERP system. So there's many scenarios that need to be flexible with our business model in order for us to be able to sometimes be able to take advantage of them and sometimes not. Simplified environment. So we're going to leverage your current skills. Again, our resources. We're going to leverage the resources that we have that understand that mirrored environment, and they can be a lot more productive within our mirrored production environment. They know what they're doing. We don't have to go through a time of training. If something goes wrong, we know exactly where to go and we know exactly how to fix it. There isn't time for investigation. So again, you're going to leverage your current processes and your current skill sets. You know, if you have a process on how you back up a certain server, you just mirrored that operating system into the cloud, so that same process sticks. Rewind once again, 10, 15 years. It was totally, you didn't know the hardware that you were getting. So maybe if you were doing a BIOS update, you had a process to do a BIOS update in corporate, but that BIOS update isn't going to work in your brick and mortar environment because we just don't know the hardware that's set over there. So that's one, that's huge. Reliability, security, and support. You're the one taking care of your security. You're the one that's putting in your monitor sets to make this environment reliable. And you're supporting your environment. You don't have to worry about someone that, you know what, maybe the night shift, the operator that's on night shift is really a Linux engineer and doesn't care to know much about Windows. So now you have an issue in your 10, 15 year ago brick and mortar situation, and really the support wasn't there. So again, you have it's more reliable, it's more secure because you're securing it and you're supporting it. Diverse and robust. That's basic. I mean, it kind of tells you right there what it is. It's an extremely diverse environment. There's a lot of different flavors of these environments that you can spin up, and it's extremely robust, as we know. I mean, the cloud's been around, it's there. We understand its diversity and its robustness. So management and consistency. It's a familiar environment because the only thing that we have to understand is a floating operating system. We go to our brick and mortar environment, we probably didn't understand the Frankenstein server that they put together for us. We don't understand it. We don't understand the drivers of that NIC card. We don't understand the video driver. So it's not a familiar environment as much as we think it is. It's not here. All we have to worry about is a floating piece of operating system. And an operating system is an operating system wherever it may be. All that we're concentrating on is that. So it's a familiar environment no matter how we turn it. It's going to be a familiar environment for us. Workflow execution and task management, same thing that I was talking a little bit about earlier, is, you know, all of our batch processes, everything, how we run, support, and maintain our environment is going to be the same. Okay, we're not going to do it any different. It's going to be within a remote control sessional way for us to do and handle it as we need, and nothing's going to change on how we do production, because literally, folks, we're going to mirror production all the way through, including, and we're going to carry over our workflows and our tasks to manage these environments. Obviously, you have live access to your environment anywhere you are. So we can perform these disaster recovery tests without having the high expense bill of having to fly the whole team over there. Guess what? We just flew our team to the Midwest, and what happened to operations here at corporate? Who's going to support us here? Well, now we're supporting you here. We're multitasking. We're getting the most out of our resources locally. We're getting the most out of a disaster recovery environment. We're leveraging the cloud, which is the ultimate goal, because we're going to show ROI through this leveraging process. And the last is self-service and protection. This one kind of it kind of speaks for itself. We have, full control of what we can protect and when. So if we have a new version and we need to open a certain port, we go in and we'll open certain port to test this new version. If we rewind 10, 15 years, we had to put in a ticket. Maybe the person that was on schedule doesn't know how to do it. We have to call the network engineer. The network engineer is working on something else, so we'll probably be able to get back to you by the end of the day. That's an 8-hour request. Usually an 8-hour request takes 12 hours. So, yeah, we can't make you productive. So you're on hold till we can get to this. No, you have full control of what your environment. You can set, as we spoke way earlier in the presentation, you can set your RPOs. It's not so much anymore of, oh, you know what, we need this much data, we need that much data. Today you need an hour, tomorrow you can do with a day's worth, then that's what you're going to set it to. It's extremely dynamic all around. And this RPO, what we've seen and when we thought couldn't be as dynamic, is dynamic. I mean, RPO and RTO seemed to be static terms 10, 15 years ago. Now they're a dynamic term. And I don't know about you, but me, as an IT professional, dynamic is always more efficient and it's a lot more musical to my ears than static. Control replication and maintenance windows. This is all at your hand. You're telling me when you can upgrade your environment. Your windows and your processes for changes and your processes for replicating are going to also be mirrored. We're going to mirror everything, folks. We want that cloud to be a mirror image of our production environment. Processes everything. If we have to maintain 2 processes, we're becoming now inefficient and we're bringing room for error. When we bring room for error, we bring room for disaster, which is totally the opposite of what we're trying to accomplish with a disaster recovery environment. Even though we're going to have it there, that doesn't mean we want to induce a disaster. So we're going to be able to bring everything over, everything, all of our maintenance windows, everything, because we set those. 10, 15 years ago, you couldn't. The vendor tells you, here's when we do changes, and here's when you can do changes. Again, they gave us the SLAs. Guess what? Now we're in control. Overall, I hope that the message that I was trying to convey to everyone, I was able to. And the message at the end is, folks, disaster recovery is no longer a high price tag. It is within reach. It is attainable for your business. You can have a disaster recovery environment, and it cannot be it doesn't have to be a dust collecting environment. It can be something that's going to work for you and with you to prevent and make your production environment more productive. I encourage everyone to, this is a little treat from us. It's the least we can do for the hour that you spent with us. We'd really like to help you understand how disaster recovery and leveraging the cloud can be of value to your organization. Please take advantage of this. Reach out to Pedro, send him an email, give him a call. He'd be more than happy to put you in contact with one of our experts that will go out, we'll go through an assessment of your environment and let you know, here's where you are and here's where you need to be, or here's where you need to be in order to be in a disaster recovery mode so that you can start moving into the cloud and start leveraging the cloud. Go ahead, give us a call. Take advantage of this that we're putting back to you for the time that you spent with us. It is much appreciated, and this is a little token that we can give back to you for your time. I appreciate everyone for their time today. I hope that this was extremely informative, and I hope I was able to generate questions for our next slide. And we'll go ahead and take questions now, y'all.
Thank you, George. Yes, we have our first question here is based on the company used in the case study you mentioned by disasterrecovery.org. What is the cost difference or savings from using conventional brick-and-mortar disaster recovery sites versus cloud?
Well, that situation, and basically what the numbers are telling us is that it's approximately, you're looking at a 40 to 50% just initially. There's a 40 that this doesn't include ongoing support and maintenance that's needed in the in a brick and mortar situation. And the reason that they don't take that into consideration when they're coming into a leveraged cloud disaster recovery environment is because that leveraged cloud environment has to be maintained and has to be supported because it's not sitting there just waiting for a disaster. So you're looking off the back, not including that expense of support and maintenance that you're paying in your old brick and mortar, anywhere from 47 to 50% savings. Hope that answered it.
Okay, George, and we have a second question here. What's been your experience implementing cloud-based disaster recovery and business continuity planning for companies who do not have it?
Well, my experience, lucky for me, has been an extremely positive one. And it's not so much in the disaster recovery, because I mean, implementing the disaster recovery, that can be as long as you bring up the environment, okay, you did your job. But I think where I'm classifying and quantifying my success has been in how they've been able to leverage the cloud and use this environment not just for disaster recovery, how this environment has become a productive member of their production society. So I think that's where I'm going ahead. I'm going to answer this question. My success has been great. I mean, the response that we've gotten from executives, in their cost savings and the return on their investment has been great. And then IT departments, of course, this is kind of their playground. This is where they can go ahead and really make their environment productive without really taxing their production environment or disrupting their production environment. So overall, I think my experience has been a good one. It's been definitely welcomed with open arms, and at the end of the day, no disasters have happened actually in any. I don't think anybody's invoked any environment that I've either suggested, architected, or brought up. But definitely, it hasn't just sat there and collected dust. It's really been leveraged and used positively to make their production environments stronger, more reliable, and more efficient.
Thank you, George. I think that's it for the questions. So I want to thank you, George, and to all of our participants for joining us today. Please watch for our follow-up email with the replay link along with a copy of the presentation. Also, please take a moment to complete our brief exit survey. On behalf of George Fernandez and the Auxis team, thanks again and enjoy the rest of your day.